Martin Scorsese's The Irishman is a gangster epic starring Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Joe Pesci and Harvey Keitel. A swan song to the mafia genre, the film follows De Niro's Frank Sheeran, a World War II veteran who goes to work as a hitman for gangster Russell Bufalino, played by Joe Pesci. When the president of the Teamsters Union, Jimmy Hoffa, played by Pacino, needs a bodyguard, Frank is appointed as his muscle. Frank and Jimmy grow close, but over the years, Jimmy's volatile attitude sours his relationship with the mob, in particular Anthony Provenzano, aka Tony Pro, whose support he needs to mount a re-election campaign after a 5-year stretch in prison. Jimmy's outspoken attitude, which includes him threatening to spill the mob's secrets and their connection to the Teamsters Union, ultimately ends up with the mob putting out a hit on Hoffa, and the man they send in to do the job is Hoffa's own close friend, Frank Sheeran. Now, of course, it goes without saying that Sheeran's account of Hoffa's disappearance, as recorded in Charles Brandt's book I Heard You Paint Houses, which The Irishman is based on, is heavily disputed, and many consider the account to be fictional, with numerous individuals and public figures, like former mobster turned YouTuber Michael Francesi, offering different accounts as to what actually happened to Hoffa. I'm not concerned with any of that for today's video. In this video, I wanted to focus on the movie and the book it's based on alone, in particular a segment of the film that's one of my favourites, and how this is expanded upon in the book. Before we get into it, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this. It's the period after Hoffa is killed, with Sheeran having flown out to Detroit and back again for Bill Bufalino's daughter's wedding. Sheeran then has a painful phone conversation with Hoffa's wife, one of De Niro's finest moments as an actor, and Hoffa's body is then disposed of. After this, we get a montage of sorts, showing everyone who is involved in the Hoffa hit going down for one thing or another, either being sent to prison or being killed. As Sheeran says in the voiceover, everybody got indicted or convicted on one thing or another, but not that. Not about Jimmy. Nobody even went to jail for that, and nobody talked. After we're shown Sheeran on trial taking the fifth, we are told that Bruno Denzetta and Marco Rossi, the cleanup guys on the Hoffa hit, got 20 years each for shaking down a trucking company. Tony Pro is convicted alongside with them, but he was already in prison for sanctioning the murder of Tony Three Fingers Castellito, as depicted in the film. Sheeran then explains that Sally Buggs, who was involved in the Hoffa hit as Tony Pro's representative, was seen walking into a federal building without informing his bosses, and we cut to Russell Bufalino telling Frank that this brings up all sorts of red flags, so Frank takes Buggs out, before revealing in a cruel twist of fate that Buggs did indeed inform someone, but that person forgot to pass the message along. Hoffa's foster son Chucky O'Brien was unknowingly involved in the hit, having driven his father to the location, and he was given 10 months. Fat Tony Salerno, the highest ranking gangster in the film, is then shown in a vulnerable and embarrassing position on a hospital operating table. We can assume something is about to be shoved up his arse. It's a humbling look for a man who we've only ever seen in a dominant role in the film, and Sheeran tells us he went down for tax evasion and he was also diagnosed with cancer. Then it's the turn of Russell Bufalino, who puts out a hit on a guy, but the guy he tells to do the deed, Jimmy the Weasel, is wearing a wire, so Bufalino is arrested. The film then toys with the narration by having Sheeran tell us he was brought in on bullshit charges, and we freeze frame on him swearing to tell the whole truth as the list of charges are laid bare: murder, attempted murder, intimidation, embezzlement and arson, and he gets done for blowing up a crane company office. There's a beautiful little shot of Sheeran looking thoughtful as he's in a car wash, as he, in the narration, expounds on why he was sent to prison. The camera then tracks across a bunch of characters in prison, all visibly aged, with Sheeran continuing, Russell had a stroke, Fat Tony couldn't control his urine no more, and my arthritis was eating away at my lower back and I couldn't feel much in my feet no more. We were all falling apart right there in the freezing cold. You could make the argument that the montage continues, with it simply showcasing a series of events that get worse and worse until we get close to the end of the film. Russell unable to eat the bread with no teeth, Bufalino dying, Sheeran's wife dying, him falling in his home, Peggy refusing to talk to him. But it's that period there, from Sheeran being interrogated to the shot of the guys playing bocce, that I'm concerned with. I've always loved this part of the film. Essentially, this portion of the film acts as a segue from when the characters are in their prime to the old man Sheeran segment in the last half hour of the film. And though it's essentially a transition, the montage is in of itself entertaining and informative. It's like those based on a true story movies, such as Goodfellas, that pops up with title cards at the end of the film telling you what happened to the characters involved. Instead, we're seeing it acted out, and rather than end the film, the movie continues going to explore Sheeran in his old age. Goodfellas and Casino, Scorsese's vintage mafia movies that The Irishman is something of a coda to, also have similar montages. In Goodfellas, Jimmy Conway takes out his entire crew who performed the Lufthansa heist, as we take a look at the grisly dead bodies. The segment ends with the shocking death of Tommy, and the subsequent half hour of the movie is different to what came before. It's erratic, paranoid, and jittery, just like the life of the coked up protagonist. In Casino, we have the House of the Rising Sun montage, where in the last half hour or so we run through the fates of all the film's extensive cast of characters, after which the movie shows us what really happened to Ace and the car bombing, surprising us with the death of Nicky Santoro, and then showcases the decline of the Las Vegas casino scene before the movie ends. Going back to The Irishman, the tone of the montage is notably different to the ones in the other two movies. Rather than use a famous song, the moody and quite frankly spooky score of the film plays as the characters are delivered their fates. It gives this segment of the film a sinister feel, almost as if fate is punishing all of the characters involved in the Hoffa hit for their heinous crime. It's got a beautiful flow to it as well. Take Sheeran telling us about the duo that got 20 years. He then says Pro got done for it as well, but he was already in the can for the Castellito hit, which Sheeran reminds us was done by Sally Buggs, and then we move on to Buggs' fate. It just all flows really well. There's a lot of great detail in it as well. Sheeran's car during the car wash scene has a Where's Hoffa sticker with a hotline number, and combined with his 1,000-yard stare, we get a feel of the hollow task he has of pretending to try and do everything he could to find Hoffa for the sake of Hoffa's family, knowing that Hoffa is dead and that he is the one who killed him. When Bufalino is arrested, we can see that the movie that is being shown in the local cinema is The Shootist. This was the final film of John Wayne, an epilogue to the actor's career, who had cancer at the time, and the film's storyline is even about his character being a dying gunfighter looking for a way to die with dignity. A send-off to Wayne and the classic western. When one considers the nature of The Irishman and what it is for the likes of Scorsese, De Niro and Pesci, it's clear the Shootist advert isn't an accident. I love how Pesci sanctions Sally Buggs' murder with a flick of an eyebrow, and the fact that they're discussing a character walking into a federal building, a place associated with law, order and justice, and Pesci says, what he did itself ain't no crime, as if to say the rules of the underworld are a complete inverse to traditional norms. They are flipped to the extent walking into a place associated with tackling crime is in of itself a crime in the world of the mob. This segment of the film is essentially a condensed version of a chapter in the novel titled Those Responsible Have Not Gotten Off Scot-Free, the idea being that everyone involved in the Hoffa hit was punished, but just not for the hit itself. The book goes into detail about the FBI putting 200 agents on the Hoffa case, and eventually a 16,000-page plus document called the Hoffex was compiled, where early on 7 men were identified as prime suspects: Tony Pro, Salvatore Brigiulio, aka Sally Buggs, Gabriel Brigiulio, Frank Sheeran, Russell Bufalino, Stephen Andretta and Thomas Andretta, the last two of whom had their names changed in the film to Marco Rossi and Bruno Denzetta. Tony Giacalone and Chucky O'Brien were also suspects, both obviously depicted in the film. The FBI seemed certain that these men were somehow involved. Wayne Davis, a former head of the FBI in Detroit, was quoted as saying, "We think we know who's responsible and what happened." Kenneth Walton, another former head of the FBI in Detroit, said, "I'm comfortable I know who did it." All 9 men appeared at a federal grand jury convened 6 weeks after Hoffa disappeared, all represented by Bill Bufalino. All took the fifth, and the book notes that Frank Sheeran took the fifth on every question he was asked, including whether the prosecutor's yellow pen was yellow, which the film depicts. Stephen Andretta, interestingly, set a Detroit record by leaving the grand jury room more than 1,000 times to consult with his lawyer. The book then says, and I quote, "Today the FBI is quite satisfied that by now they have punished the guilty parties." The former Assistant Director of Criminal Investigations for the FBI, Oliver Rendell, said, "Even if it's never solved, I can assure you that those responsible have not gotten off scot-free. The current head of the Detroit FBI office, Special Agent John Bell, said with respect to the Hoffa suspects, "Remember, the government didn't convict Al Capone for bootlegging, they convicted him of tax evasion." The book then does a rundown of all the men associated with the hit and them going down, similar to what we saw in the film, and I quote, "In 1976, a year after Jimmy Hoffa disappeared, Tony Provenzano and Sal Bergiulio were indicted for the 1961 murder of Anthony Three Fingers Castellito, a man who had grown up with Tony Provenzano on New York's Lower East Side. The murder had been ordered by Provenzano and had been committed by Sal Bergiulio. The day after the murder, Tony Provenzano was in a wedding chapel in Florida marrying his second wife. Tony Provenzano was convicted of Castellito's murder in 1978 and sent to Attica. The New York Times quoted an FBI source as saying, 'These are all direct spin-offs from our Hoffa investigation.' The Times then quoted O. Franklin Lowy, head of the FBI's Detroit office, 'I don't care how long it goes, we'll stay on it. If enough people get their toes stepped on, someone will say something. It's still just a question of getting the break we need.' Although his toes had been stepped on for life, Tony Provenzano said nothing and died in Attica 10 years later after his conviction at the age of 72. In 1976, Tony Giacalone was convicted of income tax fraud and served a 10-year sentence. 2 months after that conviction, the government released to the media embarrassing tapes from a bug in place from 1961 to 1964 that revealed that while Jimmy Hoffa was helping Tony Giacalone bribe a judge with $10,000, Tony Jack was plotting with his brother Vito Billy Jack Giacalone and Chucky O'Brien's mother Sally Paris to get Josephine Hoffa drunk while her husband was out of town and steal Hoffa's strong box full of cash from his Florida condo. The plot was foiled when Hoffa returned home unexpectedly and found the plotters in his house with his wife passed out. They all claimed they were looking after her. In 1996, Tony Giacalone was indicted for labor racketeering, but his poor health led to many trial postponements. Giacalone died in 2001 at the age of 82, with the trial on these racketeering charges still pending. The Reuters headline for Giacalone's obituary read, "Reported US mobster takes Hoffa's secret to grave." In 1977, Russell Bufalino was convicted of extortion. A conman named Jack Napoli had obtained $25,000 worth of jewelry on credit from a New York jeweler affiliated with Russell Bufalino. To get the jewelry, Napoli posed as a friend of Bufalino's, although Bufalino had never heard of him. Bufalino held a meeting with Napoli at the Vesuvio. At the meeting, the 73-year-old Bufalino threatened to strangle Napoli with his bare hands if Napoli failed to make good on the $25,000 he had stolen. As a direct result of the Hoffa investigation, Napoli had been wearing a wire. Bufalino went to jail for 4 years. When he got out in 1981, he met with 2 men and the 3 of them conspired to murder Napoli. Before the murder was to occur, one of those men, Jimmy the Weasel Fratiano, made a deal with the FBI and turned on Bufalino. Fratiano testified that at a meeting about Napoli in California, Bufalino said, "We want to clip him." Russell Bufalino, by then 79 years old, was handed a 15-year sentence. While in prison, he had a severe stroke and was transferred to Springfield Prison Hospital where he turned to religion. He died at the age of 90 in a nursing home under the FBI's watchful eye. The most the FBI could get on Chucky O'Brien was receiving a car from a trucking company with whom his local had a contract and falsifying a bank loan application. He served a 10-month sentence in 1978. Thomas Andretta and Stephen Andretta each served 20-year sentences for a 1979 labor racketeering conviction. For many years, they had been squeezing cash out of one of the nation's largest trucking companies in exchange for labor peace. Tony Provenzano was convicted with them, but he was already serving enough time for 10 men his age. Gabriel Bergiulio served 7 years for labor racketeering and extortion. Based on 2 cases brought by the Department of Labor and the FBI, in 1982, Frank Sheeran received sentences totaling 32 years. The book then poses the following questions. What is it that made the FBI so dead certain about this list of 9 certain suspects that they were putting in jail on other cases? With all their resources and their ability to investigate anywhere in the land, why were all the FBI agents and the Department of Justice's resources so narrowly focused for so long on such a small group of certain suspects? Why was the entire government effort, which included Department of Labor investigators and accountants, hovering over this small group? As a former prosecutor, I can only ask the obvious question: who was talking to the FBI? The author then posits that the only one of these men who did not go to jail, Sally Buggs, was in fact talking to the feds, and it's because of his information that they knew these men were involved in Hoffa's disappearance. This is a departure from the movie, which implies that Sally Buggs wasn't talking to the feds and therefore his murder was a bad hit. Perhaps this was to have a hit in the film that's done on bad information and paranoia, to highlight that the mob sometimes gets it wrong and how little value human life has when mobsters feel the walls closing in, even if there's no confirmation. To borrow a phrase from the book, when in doubt, have no doubt. But the novel doesn't play with the idea that Buggs was innocent. It goes deep into the idea that Sally Buggs was talking to the FBI, the reason for which I've tackled in a video called What If Sally Buggs Did Snitch to the FBI? Check it out, it's interesting stuff. Apparently he was in a poor mental state, paranoid about being sentenced for the Castellito hit, potentially was sent on the streets by the feds with a wire on him, and the mob took him out for it. One interesting thing about this situation, though, is that when the FBI's Hoffa report was finally released, albeit not fully, a free press report on the article concerning the report said, the documents suggest that the FBI's most significant leads ran out in 1978. That was the same year Sally Buggs was killed. So there you have it, just a little video I wanted to do on one of my favourite segments in both the book and the film of I Heard You Paint Houses. What do you make of the information in this video? Do you think these guys were all involved in the Hoffa hit? Let me know in the comments section below. Subscribe to the channel and thanks for watching.